Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Lisa Palmer and I'll be your moderator for the session on HTI-4 certification and FHIR interoperability testing. Now, we have some great speakers lined up for us today and a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started. Let me begin by introducing our speakers. First, we have with us today James Threatte. James is our director of ONC's ONC ATL, our test lab, and he brings deep expertise in health IT certification testing. And we also have Timothy Bennett. Tim is our director of strategic healthcare initiatives who focuses on the intersection of healthcare policy and on the technical implementation of our FHIR programs. And you know me, I'm Lisa Palmer. I'm the VP of Research Development here at Drummond, and I work on interoperability and product strategy. James, Timothy, I'm so glad to have you both on with me today.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at today's agenda and what we're going to be covering. We're going to start with the HTI-4 EPA certification requirements. We'll walk through what the rules require, what it means technically for EHR developers, and then from there, we'll shift to market insights. This is where we'll share findings from a recent market study that Drummond conducted and where the industry standards kind of meet with interoperability testing. Then we'll introduce FHIRplace. This is Drummond's solution for real-world testing, and we're going to talk about how it supports your path to true interoperability. And then we'll close with Q&A live. So again, be thinking about your questions and go ahead and add them to that comment box as you think of them throughout today's presentation. So let's start with the rule itself. The HTI-4 rule is the latest rule from ONC ASTP in the Health IT certification program. James, I'm going to let you start off for us. Give us the basics of HTI-4.
All right, no problem. HTI-4 is the new ASTP ONC released last summer and took effect October 1st. It focuses on prior authorization for both prescriptions as well as on the clinical side. So labs, surgeries, devices, everything else. So there are three new prior authorization certification criteria with Vinci implementation guides with HL7 FHIR standards. And these are going to enable real-time communication between EHRs or providers, really, with payer systems. So the process is going to be streamlined from what it is today with paper and faxes and extremely manual processes. Next slide. So the ONC rule corresponds with the CMS rule, which is for Medicare and providers to use electronic prior authorization sometime within the calendar year of 2027. So the effective date of that was also October 1st. And so this is all very well coordinated between ONC and CMS, and it's very exciting for everybody involved, I think.
Mm-hmm. It sure is. Now, the criteria you mentioned each address distinct stages of the prior authorization workflow. So we want to get into a little more detail on those criteria. James, let's go next and kind of talk about starting with E-Prescribing updates.
Sure. So the EHR developers that are currently certified will recognize the B3 electronic prescription criteria. However, a new update to the underlying script has been released and is going to be required as of January 1st, 2028 to maintain Base EHR. The prior authorization functionality in E-Prescribe is very specific to medications, but it's also special because it follows the NCPDP rather than FHIR. It is different enough from the current B3 that it's going to require live testing. And there was a test tool in beta test up until the end of the year, but that is no longer the case. We're expecting that later. Also is the B4 real-time prescription benefit criterion, which is also based on NCPDP standard. This is going to be a dependency of B3 and will be required for Base EHR on and after January 1st of 2028. So that's the E-Prescribe portion of it. Next slide. The second part is the electronic prior authorization for clinical. So devices, surgeries, as I mentioned. These are all on FHIR healthcare APIs, and they were created by the Vinci group for this exact situation. It's going to enable within criterion the coverage requirements. So the provider will be able to query the payer and ask what rules of coverage applies. Then the second part is the documentation templates and rules, DTR. That one is going to be the payer rules, forms, and lists of information that need to be supplied for a prior authorization request. And then finally, prior authorization support is actually the functionality that is submitting it and listening, waiting for a response of, approved or denied. Again, I mentioned they're all required for MEPS participating providers in 2027, that they use it at least one time. Lastly, there's the modular API capabilities. And so this is also FHIR implementation guides. These are intended to support the prior authorization functionality, but they're also standalone implementation guides, and it will be possible to certify them by themselves. If you certify G31, you will also have to demonstrate the functionality for J20. And if you certify G33, prior authorization support, you will also need to demonstrate subscriptions functionality, which is what provides the response.
Mm-hmm. That's really helpful, James. Thanks for covering those changes. We have this nice image up here from HL7 kind of illustrating the EPA workflow. Can you explain this a little bit more to kind of pull it all together?
Yeah, so this shows prior authorization with the FHIR implementation guides. The coverage requirements discovery is actually triggered by the J20 criterion. CDS hooks is the other name for it. And this is going to allow providers to have like a pop-up button or window that it can suggest to them what this patient will be approved for by their insurance. Then you'll see that it goes down to the documentation templates and rules. And so that's the intermediate step where payer is providing the details about applying for prior authorization. And then finally, prior authorization support is the last step where the application is submitted. FHIR information is included with that, and the payer can provide a response to the provider, hopefully in real time.
Mm-hmm. Right. A big change from our processes until now, right? A big change from that manual process to now be able to do this electronically. Now, I know everyone is wondering, what's the timeline here? If we're going to be doing updated testing and certification, when are we going to have test procedures and test tools available?
Good question. So if you attended our HTI webinar last September, we were expecting the imminent release of test procedures and test tools on October 1st. However, the government shut down, and so everything was pushed back. Also, during that time, it was discovered that there were some issues with those implementation guides, and some fixes were applied in the newer 2.2 version. That was just approved by HL7, I think, yesterday. And this is going to be the final version of the implementation guide for everyone to develop on. The regulation currently has the 2.0.1 versions, but again, those are not workable. So we recommend that everybody go directly to the 2.2 version. As far as the test tools goes, the E-Prescribe B3 test tool, we're looking at Q2. The B4 real-time prescription benefit criterion, we're looking at Q4. And then the Inferno test kits for FHIR prior authorization for CRD, DTR, and PAS, we're not expecting until late summer into Q4. We did hear that the CRD implementation guide test tool is going to be worked on first, and then they're going to release a G31 CRD certification test kit. Same thing with, then they're going to move to DTR, and then finally with PAS. So we're looking at this year to be the major approvals and uptake for all of this functionality, especially for developers that need to have it ready in early 2027 because their customers are demanding it.
Mm-hmm. And remind me, what is their customers' compliance date? When do providers need to complete their prior authorization?
So it's a good question. So they have to use it once during 2027, but it's thought that once they tried it, they're not going to want to go back. So we're hearing that there are user groups and organizations that are asking for this on January 1st. Mm-hmm. And so, we've been advising clients, if you are under a mandate to get started on this, start on the 2.2 version and stay tuned for the test tools.
Right. Great. Good advice. Okay. So you've covered the requirements, those updates, the things that have to be tested, the test tool timeframe, kind of summing it all up, for EHR developers that are listening, why does this all matter for them? Why does this testing and certification of these criteria matter?
Sure. Yeah. So as I mentioned, the competitive edge it's going to be something that users are very interested in. And being first in the market means that you'll be able to contribute to the specs and be able to build your system, at the beginning. It's also going to make you future-proof because FHIR is very clearly going to be the standard that health IT uses going forward. And not just for this, for prior authorization, but there's also the digital quality measures and some of the other payer provider functionality that has been worked on with the Vinci and others. The FHIR integration I mentioned is going to be very important for interoperability, and it is going to really be the linchpin of what's going to enable AI driven workflows, because that health data cannot be manually copied to separate systems. It will need to be provided in context, and this is the way to do that. Finally, early testing means that you're going to be engaged with the standards as they're being developed, and you will be part of a really great community that has been developing around this. We are, unfortunately, we can't point to a test kit for the certification, but are glad that there are some other options for testing.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, James. And that information is already helpful, and it's a pretty good segue into an important, I think, distinction that we want to make before we move on. So when we're talking about testing and certification testing validates that your system meets the technical specifications, the ones you just covered. It's confirming that baseline compliance against the standards, and that's really necessary. But it's also not sufficient for production readiness. So we know that in the real world, we need to validate interoperability with actual partner systems. That's what's going to surface interpretation differences or testing under more realistic conditions that you might encounter in the field. By doing real world style testing, that is what confirms your system works across multiple partners in the ecosystem. And so there really is a gap between those two things, between certification testing and real world testing. And that's what we are going to be talking about next. So with that framing in mind, I want to pivot and talk for just a moment about what the market is actually saying, because Drummond recently conducted a study on FHIR interoperability testing practices across health IT organizations. And the data is quite interesting. The data makes the gap between compliance testing and production readiness pretty clear. So in our FHIR interoperability testing study, we found that nearly 68% of respondents identified partner readiness as their single biggest interoperability risk, as you can see here on the screen. And over 70% rated real-world testing with external partners as very critically important. So the industry is understanding that this matters, but we'll see in a moment that the ability to actually execute that testing is where organizations are running into some problems. So let's talk a little bit about how Drummond is addressing this, and we're addressing this through FHIRplace. So FHIRplace is Drummond's solution for this exact problem. And I'm going to have Timothy in a moment walk us through FHIRplace, what it is, how it works, where it fits into your certification and compliance journey, and kind of get a broader understanding of the difference between pursuing certification compliance through the ONC program, which is needed, but then also validating that this will work when deployed in the real world. So Tim, I'm going to start with you. Thanks for joining us. I want you to kind of go through and explain, what is FHIRplace? Give us the overview.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. You know, FHIRplace is sort of a brainchild of Drummond, and I'll speak a little bit later. It really reaches back into Drummond's pre-health IT testing history. I'll kind of elaborate on that in a few minutes when we get into talking about full matrix interoperability testing. But FHIRplace, you know, in essence is, without simplifying it too much, it's a place to virtually test FHIR with other implementers. But it's, you know, much more than that. We've been spending really a year or two really thinking about the next generation of FHIR implementation guides and business use cases, and how the testing requirements of that needs to be different than you know, our prior experience, or our first generation experience of implementing FHIR, which was basically read-only patient access to their data, right? Which honestly is not that interesting of an interoperability issue. It's just, use this consumer app, and as a patient, I'm going to connect to these FHIR APIs and get access to my data. And, you know, it's not much more complicated than that. But when we start talking about things like prior authorization, which means many EHRs having to connect to many payer systems and executing multi-step business workflow electronic conversations, that becomes a much more complicated, you know, interoperability problem, or at least a potential problem. And, you know, Lisa, earlier you talked about the differences between certification testing and interoperability testing. And, you know, we have to start with standards in order to do these complex FHIR transactions like electronic prior authorization, and, you know, being able to use conformance test tools to make sure that you've implemented the standards correctly. That's a given. And, you know, participating in connectathons or initial pilots to kind of prove that it works. Those are all sort of the early things you do to sort of make sure that, you know, we've written the standards correctly, or at least they're on the right track for that. But to really roll this sort of complex business technology out into the real world and be able to conduct scalable transactions, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of transactions a day, through networks of providers and payers, we have to have a completely different way to approach testing than just testing your, you know, your own implementation against a test tool and then rolling it out there and hoping it works with hundreds of other or thousands of other implementations in a very complex ecosystem. So FHIRplace was designed for us to be able to test FHIR in a scalable way in a manner in which it's going to be deployed in the real world.
Mhm.
And that's how we're going to discover where the interoperability gremlins are, be able to identify them and be able to fix them, before we encounter them, in a scalable real world fashion.
Right. And something I want to emphasize is that this has already started. We already have the first test of CRD underway with participants in FHIRplace right now. And so this is something that we're actively working on and already doing with a first round of testing. But before we get more into that, I want to take a moment to kind of connect FHIRplace directly to some of the challenges that the market study surfaced. So, other problems that were identified in this study, partner readiness, as we mentioned, is the number one interoperability risk. So with partner readiness, Drummond is managing the partner matching. So when you join this FHIRplace community, we're matching you up with partners who are able to test with you where you're at, and you don't have to go out and find them. And that really leads into number two, where 50% said they can't access testing partners. So we're setting up structured testing events for specific use cases and merging together the partners so that you can test with people in different roles across this ecosystem. Now, connectathons, folks said, don't adequately prepare their teams for production, but that's not really the full purpose of a connectathon. It was not really propped up to say this is the end all be all of making sure you're prepared for production. It's a really great thing. It's a good way to test, but it is a point in time event. Whereas FHIRplace is the next step beyond that, which is continuous testing throughout your product lifestyle cycle. So we don't have just one test event that you come to and you're done. Rather, we have continuous testing available to you to be matched up with participants that are ready and at the same stage that you can test with. And then finally, development cycles need ongoing testing. So we know that changes are made to systems. There are updates to standards. FHIRplace is able to allow you to start where you're at and work through your development cycle leading up to production and post-production, even using real systems, real organizations, and realistic environments. So all really neat ways that we're trying to address the problems that were identified in that market study. Now, we're going to get back kind of here into some of the nuts and bolts of how it works. So Tim, you said, full matrix testing is the way that FHIRplace is testing interoperability in a real world way. So full matrix testing is having real systems on the provider side, on the payer side, intermediaries, all testing with each other at scale to confirm that interoperability is working in a simulated real world environment. So Tim, tell us a little bit more about how that works.
Yeah, so at the core of these complex FHIR use cases, and clinical prior authorization is just the first of many that's to come. If you're familiar with the No Surprises Act and patient cost transparency, that's going to be another complicated workflow. Oncology prior authorization is incredibly complex as well, and these are just a few off the top of mind that sort of represents this sort of next generation of FHIR technology that's going to drive business conversations between providers and payers, and within providers and within payers as well. So at its essence, because these are complex things to implement, we sort of need a method that sort of meets the market where they are, and each implementer where they are. Not everyone is going to be on the same development lifecycle. There are EHRs and payers out there that have been working on prior authorization as early adopters for a few years now. But then as regulatory requirements kick in, there'll be the bulk of the marketplace will begin to adopt FHIR at different paths. And then even once the technology is adopted, rolled out into the marketplace, as you rev your own products, as you increase your own FHIR capabilities over time, as the standards change and adapt and grow, the need to continually be able to test those will remain in the marketplace. In order to again, not only just prove that you're conformant or compliant to the standards, but that you also are interoperable with all of the other entities in the marketplace, because these complex use cases involve so many entities into the marketplace. So the idea is, let's bring together payers, providers, intermediaries, other providers of technology that provide niche services that makes it all work in a scalable manner, and be able to test them together, understanding that folks might be on different versions, might have different FHIR capabilities implemented at different points in times, and so being able to have a structured approach and having quite frankly a trusted neutral third party to sort of convene all the players and the stakeholders and the implementers in the marketplace together, and facilitate the testing with each other, and be able to help discover and mediate and resolve the issues that are discovered, and provide a feedback mechanism to the spec authors, or even to generate marketplace guidance, adjacent and additional to the standards, that says, in order for these standards to work in an interoperable, scalable, real world manner, you also need to do X, Y, and Z. And those are going to be realistic, real world artifacts that are going to have to emerge in order for these complex use cases to work. If you can imagine real quick, if you're an EHR and you are having to deploy that to your providers interact with hundreds or thousands of different, or hundreds, maybe thousands of different health plans, and are you expecting those business processes, those medical policies that are going to be actioned by every one of those providers, for the same MRI request or lab request? Are they going to, is all that just going to magically work when you start to roll that out together if you don't test it? No, we have to do testing in a different way. And so these elements we've brought together, these aspects we've brought together into FHIRplace, and that's part of our methodology, our tooling, and our approach as a third-party convener and facilitator of testing.
Sure. Yeah, those are really great points. And, the next slide is going to show a visual picture of how FHIRplace operates, kind of piggybacking off on what you were saying there. So how your system connects into this testing environment, and how Drummond would facilitate this matching and the types of players that you would see as part of your testing experience, where we have providers or provider platforms, payers or payer platforms, and then intermediaries, all part of this ecosystem. So Tim, do you want to just give a little more explanation on how these all work together?
Yeah, let me sort of, I kind of did it already, but let me sort of introduce this this term called full matrix testing. It's something that, unless you're just a trivia expert on Drummond's 30-year history, as a company, you might not understand that Drummond has been doing interoperability testing in the marketplace since really the advent of the internet in the late 90s, early 2000s for secure business document exchange. We didn't get into health IT testing until meaningful use in 2010, but before that, we were doing full matrix testing in other domains outside of healthcare, bringing together implementers of standards that were using the internet to exchange all kinds of different business documents invoices, purchase orders, like in the B2B space, between Walmart and their suppliers and Home Depot and their suppliers, that sort of thing. We convened technology vendors of those standards together, and these were competitors in the marketplace, and we served as a neutral third-party safe space where they could come together, test their implementations together, find interoperability issues, fix them, and then they could go out and deploy and sell those applications in the marketplace, and their buyers had confidence that they could purchase their products and know that they were interoperable and they would work with their trading partners. And this is the same experience and knowledge that we're sort of bringing to the FHIR community here, into the healthcare space. And so the idea with full matrix is that everyone tests with everyone, and that's how we find where the interoperability issues are. So in the real world, a provider is not going to do point-to-point FHIR connections with 1,000 different payers. Hundreds of thousands of providers are not going to do that. They're going to do that through trusted networks. That's what TEFCA is designed for, with the QHINs, and we've had experience for a long time in the healthcare space of health information exchanges, HIEs, clearinghouses, and other entities like that serve a role to connect providers and payers together in order to exchange data exchange. And that's going to be a key role in the future for doing transactional FHIR at scale. So that's what we do with FHIRplace. This is sort of a three-dimensional matrix, Lisa, where you have providers, payers, and intermediaries all testing with and through each other with these complex, FHIR use cases. And that's how we're going to prove that not only are these implementations conformant to the standards, but they're also interoperable with each other, and provide a way for the marketplace to have confidence in that, and for you as an implementer to have confidence that your product is going to work when you roll it out in the real world.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. And Drummond really wants to be here for you, for our customers, both from an O&C testing and certification perspective, and then with FHIRplace, that we're also here for you as you're looking to test production readiness, right? So that we can kind of be with you for the whole experience, from the initial compliance testing, and also making sure that this works for you when you deploy it in the field. That's what Drummond wants to provide our customers as part of our kind of longstanding history of wanting to walk beside you through this compliance journey. We know this is hard. This is a complicated one. And so we really would like to step into it with you and help you through each part of the process. Now, as we go to kind of wrap up here, I want to talk about why developers engage with FHIRplace. It really comes down to three things that we've heard. So first is risk reduction. This is catching interoperability issues early before production deployment, not after your customers find them. We all know that that's much more difficult to have to fix things and deploy fixes than catching them early. Second is time savings. You don't need to independently coordinate testing partners. Drummond can handle that matching for you and take that burden off of your shoulders and the cost off of your shoulders, because that can be a very expensive process and resource intensive. And third is confidence. So this is really being able to demonstrate to your customers that you validated your system with real partners before go live. That's a meaningful differentiator in use cases where the stakes are so high, like EPA. Now, I want to wrap with just the steps for getting started with FHIRplace. So as you look at this, if you're saying, yes, this is what I need, I want to step into this process, you would share your interest with us and give us some of your capabilities. So we would talk with you, understand what we call your capability profile. Where are you at with FHIR? Which use cases are you doing? How far are you into your development process? We would then match you after onboarding with the right testing partners. So we would find people that you want to test with in the right roles and at the right place that you are at. You would then do that testing with intermediaries and with payer systems, and you would get results. You would get results showing any errors that were found on your side, on the testing partner side, and Drummond would be with you to help those get resolved and then retested to validate that everything is working. And then finally, at the end, there would be certification. This is a Drummond certified status that's different than the O&C certification. So you have your O&C cert, but then this is a Drummond interoperability certification saying, hey, we've actually tested with these players, we've tested in a real world fashion, and this is something that we can then give to our customers to show that we went a step beyond and actually did real world validation. All right, now that is going to bring us to the end of our prepared content today. We wanted to save some time for questions, which I see we have in the comment box. So I'm going to open it up for that now. Continue to put your questions in if you have them. I'm going to take a look at what's been submitted. And if we don't get to your question today, we can certainly follow up with you directly. So let me see what questions we have. Okay, first, James, I think this one is going to come to you. So the first question is, are all 3 IGs required for MIPS, or can you attest with just PAS?
Well, that's a good question. Unfortunately, we really can't comment on what MIPS is going to require. All that they've said is that providers need to use it once, and it needs to be a certified API. I know that a lot of developers are building all 3, but I'm not sure what certification requirements there will be around that yet. They're not currently requiring developers to certify those G or J criteria.
Mm-hmm. So that maybe leads into the next question, and then Tim, you can comment as well, but must I be certified to G31 through 33 for demonstration of EPA in 2028? Now, I think this person that submitted this actually corrected that and said for demonstration in a later comment, for demonstration of EPA in 2027. It says, I understood CMS is not requiring the use of certified functionality for EPA in 2027, and ONC has not set a timeline that vendors must certify to these criteria. So James, do you want to comment on that? I think that kind of touches on the comment you were previously making.
Yeah, so there's 2 different requirements here. There's the ONC regs, and then there's the CMS regs. So the ONC regs apply to the EHR developers, and currently there is no requirement that EHR developers certify any of those G or J criteria. The only one that is required is going to be the E-Prescribe B3, B4 in order to maintain Base EHR. Mm-hmm. Maybe Tim knows what plans are around all 3 implementation guides.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of these requirements from CMS are a little bit in flux. As you guys probably understand, there's been, because of the complexity, the adoption rate of these EPA standards are lagging in the payer world and also in the EHR world as well. Some of that has been because, as James alluded to earlier, they're improving the standards and making them, more, workable in the real world. And of course, vendors are, admittedly, reluctant to begin to put a lot of work into adopting the standards until there's some confidence that the standards are correct. And I think now with 2.2, being approved and rolled out, we'll see that. But initially CMS was kind of adamant that to meet the MIPS standard, you would need to do the full sort of end to end. You couldn't just do a CRD transaction, for instance, and meet that requirement. But I don't think that they've really come to a, full clarification on that. I have heard that they are considering maybe just a CRD straight to PAS transaction that maybe doesn't have to include DTR. But again, I think it's a little early to really know exactly what those requirements are going to be. And I don't think that CMS yet is requiring providers to be using certified technology, because we've just now, you can't even certify to HTI-4 yet, right? So I think there's just some waiting on all the different aspects of the marketplace to catch up with each other. So, the first year of the MIPS measure, I think, is, maybe just everyone dipping their toe in it. And, but with a signal to the next round of rulemaking, HTI-6, and CMS is working also on their next round of rulemaking as well, that we could see some more, definite specifics around it. So sorry for the, for the wishy-washiness of it, but, I think that's just, I think that's where the regulators are right now.
The state of the industry at the moment. So it
Yeah.
sounds like right now, as we're looking at CRD, DTR, and PAS, there's been some differing conversations around that, whether all three will be required for the one transmission, whether maybe just CRD directly to PAS, skipping DTR, or even something different than that. And so we're kind of waiting for more guidance from CMS on what their expectations are. Is that a correct summation, James?
Yeah, I think, and we've been told, or at least let's just say not been told, but there's enough hints that HTI-6 should be out this summer. And also new rulemaking from CMS is also due out this year as well. CMS has a connectathon in July. I kind of think maybe there's going to be some, additional rulemaking from them around the same time frame. I know CMS and ONC-ASTP has been working together so that they can present sort of a unified front around and the whole CMS networks is also a thing as well. So I think it's a stay tuned.
Sure.
And we'll probably have better, understanding.
Yeah.
By the summer.
Well, Drummond will really be watching this closely. Of course, I know you all are as well, but Drummond is watching very closely and will be putting out more guidance as we see it. So once we see more information coming out from CMS, from ONC, some of that coordinated approach, we'll be having further, webinars and materials going out to our customers to help you stay informed. Because we know this is a tough spot to be in where, you're trying to plan ahead for the future, but don't always have all the clarity that you need to do that. So we'll continue to push information to you as we receive it.
Yeah, and participation in FHIRplace we're specifically focused on getting systems ready for in the short term, right? The rest of this year, we're focused on doing EPA testing to get folks ready for whatever 2027 and 2028 requirements are going to be there for the federal regs. So
that's a really great point, Tim, because I think that's a key element here is of us saying we want to kind of walk with you through this whole process, is that you don't need to wait for ONC related additional guidance or CMS additional guidance to come out. You can start in FHIRplace now, be working on these things, testing, making sure everything's working as we wait for these other test tools and as we wait for further guidance on what CMS is going to require in year one. So really, because we're saying we can meet you wherever you're at in the development process, that's now for folks no matter where they're at. Let me take a look here and see if we have other questions. I know a lot of questions were around that requirement for the one submission. Here's another one. I don't know, this might be in the same vein, James. I'm not sure if we have this clarity, but someone was asking, does the one EPA transaction have to be during the 180-day reporting period, or can it be any point in 2027? Do we have that clarity?
Not that I've seen. It has not been clear at all. It just says calendar year. So,
okay.
until CMS releases additional rulemaking, probably later this year. With more details, right now, all we know is that it has to be used once.
Sure. Yep. Okay. All right. Another question, just a reminder, asking if this is being recorded. Yes, it is absolutely being recorded, and we will make that available to participants. Okay, final question. This is one that I just would like us to reiterate about, do we know when to expect availability of test tools to complete certification? Just remind us the dates on that, James.
Our information is E-Prescribe B3 is no earlier than Q2, and prior authorization tools no earlier than late Q3, early Q4.
Okay. All right. Another one here that just came in is J21 subscription criteria mandatory for certification.
No.
No.
No, it's not part of Base EHR, and it's also a component of G33, but it's allowed to be certified separately for developers that wish to show that they have that functionality.
Sure. Okay. All right. Let me see. That is all of our questions for today. So James, Timothy, thank you for spending the time with us. Thanks to everyone who joined for taking time out of your day. We hope this gave you a clearer picture of what HTI-4 requires today and what information we're waiting on, and that will come ahead. We're hoping you got to see kind of what the market's experiencing, where FHIRplace might be able to help you out in the meantime. And on the screen, you're going to see ways you can get in touch with us, as well as a QR code that you could use to book a free consultation with Timothy if you'd like to address your FHIR interoperability questions with him directly. So we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great afternoon.